Welcome in, everybody, to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the recent departure of Justin Trudeau from Canadian politics.
Yeah.
After 9 years as Prime Minister, his time has come to an end. And
Yes.
we're going to be looking at what led to this,
Right.
drawing insights from an article in Unheard
But
called Farewell to Canada's Sun King.
hmm.
I mean, just that title alone, Sun King, makes you kind of wonder what happened, right?
This really does set the stage for some kind of a story of a rise and a fall.
Yeah, and the article really leans into that comparison to Louis the Horse-Thief,
Hmm.
arguing that Trudeau's style was all about spectacle and celebrity.
Right.
And, at first it seemed to work.
Mm-hmm.
Back in 2015, when much of the Western world was tilting toward figures like, Brexit and Trump,
Yeah.
Trudeau presented this completely different image.
A stark contrast for sure. And as the article points out, publications like The Economist and Rolling Stone were absolutely enamored with him. They saw him as the answer to this rise of populism. And The Economist even went so far as to say liberty move north.
It really did feel like Trudeau-mania 2.0 at the time.
Yes,
Do you remember what your impression was back then?
I do.
I have to admit, even I got a little caught up in the excitement,
Yeah.
especially with such a promising team around him, including Chrystia Freeland.
Right. She was definitely a key figure, especially with her background as a Rhodes Scholar and her work focusing on economic inequality.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at their early economic policies, it seemed like they were really trying to put those ideas into practice.
Yeah.
The author describes it as this kind of blend of stimulus spending and industrial policy
Okay.
that was specifically designed to address the concerns of the middle class that were fueling those populist movements elsewhere.
That's what makes this detail from the article so fascinating to me.
Hmm?
Apparently, Trudeau actually warned about the negative impacts of low-skill immigration on Canadian workers before he even became Prime Minister.
Right. That's interesting. A bit ironic, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Considering how his later immigration policies were criticized.
Right.
But it does show that he was aware of these concerns, even back then.
For sure.
It does kind of beg the question, what changed?
Yeah.
Was this a genuine shift in thinking, or did political pragmatism just kind of take over?
It's a great question, and it gets even more complicated when you look at the article's argument that, in practice, Trudeau's policies ended up favoring older home-owning Canadians, while younger generations were often left behind.
This is where we really start to see that clash between rhetoric and reality.
Yeah.
Take affordable housing, for example.
Right.
Trudeau spoke frequently about the need for it,
He did.
but those policies never really materialized in any meaningful way.
It's a point the article really emphasizes, this disconnect between what was promised and what was delivered.
Yeah.
And it really impacted young Canadians who
Yeah.
were initially some of his strongest supporters.
And, of course, we can't forget about the ethical scandals that ended up tarnishing his image,
Oh.
leading to that minority government in 2019.
Yeah.
It does raise the question, did those scandals erode public trust
Mm-hmm.
and then limit his ability to enact the changes that he had promised?
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting, though, that even with those setbacks, he still managed to achieve some policy wins that resonated with Canadians.
True. Legalizing marijuana, for instance.
Right.
That was a pretty significant move.
For sure, it shows that he wasn't entirely out of touch
Right.
with what people wanted.
Right.
But then, of course, came the unprecedented challenge of COVID-19,
Right.
which really threw everything into disarray. And the article delves into how Trudeau navigated not only the pandemic itself, but also the Freedom Convoy protests
Yeah.
that emerged in response to his COVID policies.
Oh, yeah.
The Freedom Convoy was such a pivotal moment.
It really was.
In Trudeau's tenure, the article makes this interesting point about how the convoy actually used spectacle in a way that mirrored Trudeau's own tactics. Those massive truck convoys descending on the capital,
Right.
capturing global attention. It was a powerful image
It was.
that kind of turned the tables on him.
Yeah. What do you make of that?
It's a fascinating observation.
Yeah.
I think the convoy really did tap into that same sense of spectacle that had initially propelled Trudeau to fame,
Yeah.
and it forced him into a corner, didn't it?
It did.
His decision to invoke the Emergencies Act,
Right.
a rarely used law that grants the government extraordinary powers
Wow.
to disperse the convoy,
Yeah.
proved extremely controversial.
It did, and it really damaged his image as a champion of individual liberties,
Yeah,
which had been such a core part of his brand.
it really had.
It seems like that's when things really started to unravel.
Yeah, the article actually uses this phrase to describe his final years in office.
Okay.
They call it a political slow heat death. That paints a pretty bleak picture.
It does, and the article points to a number of factors that contributed to this decline.
Like what?
The erosion of the immigration system.
Right.
The worsening housing crisis.
Right.
A growing sense that Canada was just unprepared for the economic challenges that were ahead.
Yeah.
All of these issues seem to converge, creating a sense of disillusionment, particularly among those who had once been Trudeau's most ardent supporters.
That's what I find so tragic about this whole story.
Yeah.
He came in with so much promise, and yet he ended up losing the trust of those young Canadians who had once seen him as a symbol of hope and change.
It's really interesting, and the article makes a rather bold claim.
Okay.
Suggesting that it was actually Freeland,
really?
his loyal advisor.
Wow.
Who ultimately helped bring about his downfall.
So she was the one who pushed him out.
Well, the article argues that she recognized the need for a change in direction.
Yeah.
And that perhaps Trudeau had just become a liability.
That's a fascinating interpretation. It raises the question, was this a betrayal?
Mm-hmm.
Or was Freeland simply trying to salvage a sinking ship? I mean, we've talked about the rise, the promise, the contradictions, the scandals, the pandemic, and ultimately the fall.
Right.
So what does it all mean? What's the takeaway from this deep dive?
Well, I think for me, the key takeaway is the fragility of image in politics.
Okay.
Trudeau's initial success was largely built on his charisma and his ability to project a certain image.
Right.
But as the article highlights, that image just couldn't withstand the pressures of governing.
Yeah.
Especially when faced with complex challenges and policy contradictions.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It does.
About the limits of spectacle-driven politics in an era of such profound global uncertainty.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It makes you think about, what do we prioritize when we evaluate our leaders?
Yeah.
Are we drawn to charisma and a compelling narrative, even if the policies don't necessarily align with those promises?
Right.
Or do we demand a more critical assessment, looking beyond the surface and scrutinizing the actual impact of their decisions?
Yeah, it's almost like we have to train ourselves to be more discerning consumers of political information.
Yeah.
To look beyond the headlines and the carefully crafted sound bites.
I think that's such a crucial point.
Yeah.
We can't just passively accept the narratives that are presented to us.
Yeah.
We have to engage, critically ask tough questions.
Right.
And hold our leaders accountable regardless of, how charming or charismatic they may seem.
That's a great point, and it brings us back to you. What are your takeaways from this deep dive into Trudeau's rise and fall? What resonates with you? Does his story make you rethink your own approach to evaluating political leaders?
It definitely is a story that prompts reflection.
Yeah.
And I think it really highlights the importance of looking beyond the surface, of questioning assumptions, and of recognizing that even the most promising leaders can fall short of expectations.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us as we explored this complex legacy of Canada's Sun King.
Yeah.
We hope this conversation has given you some food for thought and perhaps even inspired you to take a closer look at the political landscape around you. Until next time.